You remember the quietness of the house in those early morning hours, maybe when you were 7, maybe 9, and the light came through the kitchen window in that particular way it does before anyone else is awake. Standing on a chair to reach the cereal on the high shelf became routine, your hands already knowing how to open the milk carton, how to pour just enough, how to put it back before it got warm. The sound of your own breathing in that empty kitchen felt normal, and being alone with your small morning routine was just how things were. No single moment taught you to be independent because it arrived quietly, the way fog settles. And one day you simply understood that no one was coming to help with your homework, that tears didn't summon comfort, that hunger meant finding something yourself. Reading the emotional weather of your home became second nature, making yourself small when you needed to, solving your own problems before they became anyone else's burden, becoming fluent in a language most children never have to speak. What no one tells you about that kind of early independence is that it doesn't feel like strength when you're living it. Necessity is what it feels like, this quiet understanding that you are alone in ways that other children aren't, even when you're sitting in a room full of people. Other kids run to their parents with scraped knees, with bad dreams, with questions about why the sky changes colours, and you watch them, and something in you understands that you stopped running a long time ago. What grows in that space isn't confidence, but something else entirely. A kind of premature self-reliance that feels less like a skill you developed and more like a skin you grew too early, before you were ready because you had to. Capable, yes, and resourceful, certainly. But underneath all that capability lived a child who was simply trying to survive the particular loneliness of being needed by no one, or worse, being needed by everyone except in the ways that mattered. Reading people the way sailors read the ocean became your survival skill, developing an almost supernatural ability to sense mood shifts, to detect the subtle changes in someone's voice that meant danger or distance or disapproval, anticipating needs before they were spoken, diffusing tension before it escalated, making yourself useful in ways that might earn you a moment of attention or approval wasn't manipulation. This was survival. Pure and simple. Growing up faster than you should have happened, not because you wanted to, but because the alternative was unthinkable. Because the alternative was vulnerability in a world that had already shown you what happened when you were vulnerable. Asking for help that wouldn't come, or worse, that would come with strings attached, with resentment, with the unspoken message that your needs were a burden too heavy to carry, made staying silent the safer choice. Carrying yourself became the only option. Learning to be both the child and the parent, the one who hurt and the one who soothed, the one who needed and the one who provided. You split yourself in two, and the child part went somewhere quiet and hidden, while the capable part stepped forward to meet the world. People praised you for it, calling you mature for your age, responsible, so put together, and teachers loved you while adults trusted you. Part of you swelled with pride at these words because at least they were something. At least they meant you were doing it right. This impossible task of raising yourself. But another part of you, that hidden child part, wanted to scream that you didn't want to be mature. Being messy and needy and impossible was what you wanted, wanting someone to see through your capability to the desperate longing underneath. That child learned to be quiet while the capable one learned to be louder. And somewhere in that exchange, you lost something you didn't even have words for yet. The simple, animal trust that the world would catch you if you fell disappeared, along with the belief that you could be small and still be safe, along with the experience of dependence without fear, of need without shame. This is the story of what happens when childhood ends before it begins, when you become your own parent before you understand what a parent is, when you learn to meet your own needs before you even knew what your needs were. The particular kind of independence that doesn't feel like freedom, but feels like exile shapes everything that comes after in ways you're only beginning to understand. The memories might come in fragments, like your mother's bedroom door closed in the middle of the afternoon, the darkness behind it something you learned not to disturb, or perhaps your father's absence wasn't physical, but emotional. His body in the room, but his mind somewhere else entirely, somewhere you couldn't reach, even when you needed him most. Maybe the sound of arguments stretched late into the night, while you lay in bed, pillow over your ears, willing yourself to become invisible. Early independence rarely announces itself with a single dramatic moment, because instead it accumulates in small abandonments. The permission slip you learned to sign yourself because asking meant waiting for a parent who might or might not remember. The parent-teacher conferences where you sat alone because both your parents were working, or fighting, or simply checked out. The birthday parties you didn't attend because there was no one to take you, and you learned to say you didn't want to go anyway. Learn to make your isolation feel like choice. Or perhaps your independence came not from neglect but from being needed too much, too soon. Becoming the translator for a parent who couldn't speak the language, literal or emotional. The mediator in their marriage is what you became. The one who absorbed their complaints about each other, who carried secrets too heavy for your small shoulders, who turned into the caretaker when illness or addiction or depression moved into your home like an unwelcome guest that never left. Making yourself useful became your currency, your way of mattering, because if you couldn't be cared for, at least you could be needed. Learning to cook before other kids learned to make toast, managing household tasks, paying attention to bills, making sure your younger siblings got to school turned you into a child-shaped adult. Moving through responsibilities that should have belonged to someone else. The world called this resilience. And maybe it was, but resilience born from necessity carries a different weight than resilience built on a foundation of safety. Your resilience wasn't a skill you chose to develop, but a defense mechanism, an adaptation to an environment that required you to grow up or get lost in the chaos. What no one saw was how exhausting it was, how you'd watch other children be careless with their parents' attention, demanding and ungrateful and utterly secure in the knowledge that they would be taken care of. That carelessness wasn't something you could afford because every interaction felt like a negotiation. Every request for anything felt like risking too much. And that's when you learn not to request. When you learn to look at your own needs as optional, as luxuries you couldn't afford. Underneath all of it, there was the quiet understanding that something was wrong. That other families didn't operate this way. That your friends went home to parents who asked about their day, who helped with homework. Not because they were asked, but because that's what parents did. Feeling the wrongness of your situation, even as you adapted to it, created its own particular pain, knowing you were missing something without quite being able to name what it was. Perhaps the hardest part was that your independence was praised even as it hollowed you out, with teachers commenting on how responsible you were, and family friends marvelling at your maturity. Performing this independence, making it look natural, hiding the desperate effort it required to hold yourself together became your specialty, and that's when you learned that your pain was most acceptable when it was invisible, when it didn't inconvenience anyone, when it came packaged as strength, getting very good at being strong, getting very good at not needing, getting very good at functioning, in circumstances that should have broken you, became your entire existence. And in the process, you forgot something essential, that children aren't supposed to function, that they're supposed to fall apart sometimes, that they're supposed to be held, that they're supposed to have someone else do the thinking and the worrying and the protecting. But you didn't have that luxury, becoming your own protector, your own comforter, your own parent, and a part of you is still that child. Standing alone in an empty kitchen, learning to feed yourself because no one else will. The thing about surviving your childhood is that you don't just survive it because you build a self around the surviving, and the strategies that kept you safe become the architecture of your personality, so deeply embedded that you forget they were ever strategies at all. They just feel like who you are. Anticipating everything became your default setting once your nervous system developed an early warning system that could detect danger in the shift of someone's posture, in the pause before they spoke, in the quality of silence in a room. This hypervigilance became second nature. And even now, you walk into spaces and immediately map the exits, read the emotional temperature, position yourself where you can see everything. You call it awareness, but the exhaustion of never being able to rest tells a different story. And that's when control took over, because you learned that chaos happened when you weren't paying attention, turning you into someone who pays attention to everything. Organising, planning, anticipating every possible outcome and preparing for it makes your life a series of contingency plans. And surprises feel less like excitement and more like danger, because surprises once meant danger. Spontaneity feels less like freedom and more like recklessness. And people call you rigid without understanding that your rigidity is the scaffolding holding you together. Making yourself small in certain ways and large in others became your survival pattern. Small in your needs, where you can go days without asking for anything, without admitting you're struggling, without reaching out. But large in your usefulness, where you're always the one people call when they need something, always reliable, always capable. Being needed was safer than needing. Giving was less risky than receiving, and that lesson stuck. Perfectionism became your religion, because if you could just do everything right, maybe you'd be safe. Maybe you'd be loved. Maybe the instability would stop. Measuring your worth in achievements, in the absence of mistakes, in your ability to meet impossible standards became automatic. And the thought of failure doesn't just make you anxious, but makes you feel like you're disappearing. Like without your competence, there's nothing left of you worth keeping. Underneath all these carefully constructed defenses, you developed something quieter and more insidious, which was emotional numbness that wasn't dramatic because you didn't suddenly stop feeling. Instead, your feelings became something you experienced from a distance, like watching yourself through glass, and learning to intellectualize emotions rather than feel them. To analyze rather than experience meant that when something hurt, you'd think about why it hurt, study it, understand it. But the actual feeling stayed safely cordoned off where it couldn't overwhelm you. Becoming someone who could function through anything, through physical pain, through emotional devastation, through crisis, meant you just kept moving. People marveled at your strength, your resilience, but what they didn't see was that this wasn't strength at all. This was dissociation. The learned ability to separate yourself from your own experience because your experience was once too much to bear. And here's what's strange about these coping mechanisms, in that they worked, they got you through, they kept you alive, and functioning in circumstances that could have destroyed you, but they don't know when to stop. Your nervous system doesn't understand that the danger has passed, keeps preparing for threats that aren't coming, keeps protecting you from abandonment by never letting anyone close enough to leave, keeps you vigilant against chaos that no longer exists. Walking through your adult life carrying adaptations that once saved you but now confine you means that the hypervigilance that protected you makes it impossible to relax. The independence that sustained you makes it impossible to accept help. The emotional control that kept you stable makes it impossible to feel. The perfectionism that earned you approval makes it impossible to be human. Looking at other people who seem to move through the world with ease, who can ask for what they need without shame, who can make mistakes without falling apart, who can trust without testing, who can rest without guilt makes you wonder how they learned to do that. You wonder what it would feel like to put down the weight of constant self-reliance. Even just for a moment, wonder who you might be without all this armor. But the armor has been on so long, you're not sure where it ends and you begin. You're good at your job, maybe too good, and being the one they call when something's wrong, when there's a crisis, when someone needs to work late or take on extra responsibility, means saying yes before you even think about it. Because saying yes is what you know how to do. But underneath the competence, there's a kind of hollowness. And climbing the ladders, checking the boxes, achieving the things you were supposed to achieve, led somewhere along the way to realizing that none of it fills the space inside you that's been empty since childhood. Success feels different for you than it seems to feel for others because there's no moment of arrival, no sense of having made it, and every achievement is immediately followed by the question of what's next. What more you need to do to prove your worth, to justify your existence. The accolades feel thin, temporary, and you can't quite believe them. And imposter syndrome isn't just a feeling, but the constant background noise of your life. The sense that you're always one mistake away from everyone discovering you're not as capable as they think. And relationships, which is where the cost of your early independence becomes most visible, reveal that you've built a life where you don't need anyone, and now you can't figure out how to want anyone either. When someone gets close, something in you recoils because intimacy feels like a trap. Vulnerability feels like handing someone a weapon, and being alone for so long means that another person's presence in your space feels like an intrusion. even when you invited them to. Sabotaging without meaning to happens when you pick partners who are emotionally unavailable because their distance feels familiar, feels safe, or you choose people who need you, who are broken in ways that let you be the strong one, the caretaker, because that's a role you understand. But when someone offers you genuine partnership, genuine vulnerability, something that requires you to actually need them back, you find reasons to leave, you find flaws, you convince yourself it's not right, that you're better off alone. The truth is that depending on someone terrifies you because you've learnt that people leave, that they let you down, that the moment you need them is the moment they disappoint you. Maintaining your independence, like a religion, means handling everything yourself, not calling when you're struggling, not asking for help, even when you desperately need it, and then resenting the people in your life for not offering, for not seeing. Even though you've become a master at hiding your needs, your friendships have a certain quality to them, where you're the one people lean on, the one who listens, who helps, who shows up. But when they ask how you're doing, you give them the edited version. Fine, busy, good, and deflecting with questions about them. Keeping the focus anywhere but on your own inner life creates a profound loneliness. Being surrounded by people who care about you but never quite letting them see who you really are. Sometimes you wonder if you even know who you really are, because spending so long being what others needed, being capable and strong and fine, meant losing touch with the parts of yourself that are messy and uncertain and afraid. Optimizing yourself into something functional, but not quite human, means going through the motions of your life. Through work, through social obligations, through the maintenance of your independent existence. And somewhere underneath it all is a person you haven't met in years. A person who might want things, who might need things, who might be soft if given the chance. The exhaustion catches up to you in strange moments when you'll be doing something ordinary, like making dinner, driving home, lying in bed, and suddenly you're overwhelmed by how tired you are. Not sleepy tired, but soul-say tired. Tired of holding yourself together, tired of being strong, tired of the constant vigilance, the endless self-reliance, the performance of having it all under control. And in those moments you might catch a glimpse of what you've been running from all these years. Which is the grief. The grief for the child you were who had to grow up too fast. The grief for all the comfort you never received. All the times you needed someone, and they weren't there. The grief for the version of yourself you might have been if you'd been allowed to be weak sometimes, to fall apart, to be held. But grief requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires letting your guard down. And letting your guard down feels like dying, which is why you push it away. Getting up, keeping moving, handling whatever comes next is what you're good at because you've always been good at that. Except sometimes, late at night, when you're alone with yourself and there's nowhere left to run to, you feel the weight of all this independence. You feel how much energy it takes to never need anyone. You feel the walls you've built to keep yourself safe. And you realise they're also keeping you isolated. And you wonder, in those quiet moments, what it would be like to let someone in. Really in, past all the defences and the competence and the carefully maintained distance. But morning comes, and with it, the familiar armour, and you go back to being the person you know how to be, which is independent, capable, alone. The awakening doesn't happen all at once because it comes in moments. Maybe when you're watching a movie, and there's a scene of a parent comforting a child, and something in your chest cracks open. Or talking to a friend about your childhood, and they say something like, "That must have been really hard." And you realise no one, including you, has ever acknowledged that before, or finding yourself crying for no reason you can name. And underneath the tears is a grief so old and so deep that it feels like it's been waiting your whole life to be felt. The first step is the hardest one, which is recognising that something is wrong. Not wrong with you, but wrong with what happened to you. That the independence you've worn as a badge of honour is actually a scar. That the strength everyone admires is sometimes just frozen fear. That you survived something you shouldn't have had to survive. And survival doesn't mean it was okay. This recognition comes with its own kind of pain because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you understand that your hypervigilance is a trauma response, that your inability to accept help is a wound, that your emotional numbness is a defense mechanism that outlived its usefulness, everything shifts. The story you've been telling yourself about who you are starts to unravel. And underneath it is a truth that's been waiting, which is that you were a child who needed care, and you didn't get it. And that wasn't your fault. Grieving your childhood is a strange process when you're already an adult, because you're mourning something you never had, crying for a child who is you, but also not you anymore. Feeling for the first time maybe the full weight of how alone you were, how scared, how much you needed someone to see you, to hold you, to tell you that everything would be okay. And no one did, and you had to become that person for yourself before you even understood what that meant. Letting yourself feel it is the thing your younger self couldn't do, feeling the feelings fully because you were too busy surviving them. But you're safe now, or safer at least, safe enough to let the walls come down a little, safe enough to stop running from your own pain. The tears you cry now are the tears you couldn't cry then. The anger you feel now is the anger that had nowhere to go when you were small. And this isn't regression, but integration. Finally giving your emotions the space they needed all along. And here's what you learn in the grieving, which is that needing people isn't weakness, that asking for help isn't failure, that vulnerability isn't dangerous in the way you learned it was. Your childhood taught you that dependence equals danger, that needing someone means they have the power to destroy you. But that was true in a specific context, with specific people who couldn't or wouldn't meet your needs. And it's not a universal truth about all relationships, about all people, about all of life. Learning to receive is its own kind of practice, starting small with letting someone buy you coffee, letting a friend help you move, letting yourself cancel plans because you're tired without an elaborate excuse, letting someone see you cry. These small acts of letting people in are revolutionary for someone who's spent their whole life keeping people out. And they feel terrifying at first, exposing, but slowly you might start to notice that the world doesn't end when you're not perfectly self-sufficient. That some people actually want to help. That being cared for doesn't make you weak, but makes you human. Reparenting yourself sounds like a therapy buzzword, but it's really just this: becoming for yourself what no one was for you. Noticing when you're scared and saying kind things to yourself instead of criticizing yourself for being scared. Letting yourself rest without earning it. Feeding yourself good food not because you should, but because you deserve to be nourished. The gentle, patient work of meeting your own needs, not from a place of grim self-reliance, but from a place of love is what this is about. And maybe, slowly, you start to trust, not blindly because you've earned your wariness, but wisely, learning to distinguish between people who are safe and people who aren't. Learning that trust doesn't have to be all or nothing, that you can let people in gradually. Testing the waters, seeing if they can hold what you're offering. Learning that some people will disappoint you, and that's okay, that doesn't mean everyone will. Learning that you can be hurt and survive it, that you can be disappointed and not fall apart. That you've been through worse becomes part of the process. The softest thing you'll ever do is let yourself be soft, because after years of being hard, of being strong, of being the one who doesn't break, choosing gentleness with yourself is radical. Choosing to lay down the armor, even just for an afternoon, choosing to admit you're tired, you're hurt, you need help, choosing to believe that you deserve care, not because of what you do or how useful you are, but simply because you exist becomes the work. This journey doesn't have an end point, because you don't arrive at a place where you're suddenly healed, where the past doesn't matter anymore, where you've become someone completely new. Instead, you become someone who can hold both truths, that you were hurt and that you're healing. That you learnt to be independent too early, and that you're learning now what healthy dependence looks like. That you survived, and that survival took something from you, and that you're slowly reclaiming what was lost. The child you were is still inside you, the one who stood alone in that quiet kitchen, who learned to be strong before they learned to be soft, who carried burdens too heavy for small shoulders. And that child doesn't need you to be perfect. They just need you to finally stop abandoning them the way everyone else did. Need you to turn toward them with compassion instead of criticism. Need you to say, I see you, I'm sorry, you deserve better, and I'm here now. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's where healing begins, not in becoming someone new, but in finally being present for who you've always been, in letting yourself be both, independent and connected, strong and soft, the child who survived and the adult who can finally let that child rest. You were alone once, but you don't have to be anymore. And learning that, believing that, living that is the work, is the journey. and it's worth every difficult, tender, terrifying step.